and only if the energy production as a whole becomes cleaner. As we said before, we can have all our cars running on electricity, but if electricity is produced out of coal, maybe we better run it on petrol or on diesel. And the third one is definitely yes, we are ready as manufacturers to switch to electric or to other propulsion combustions, provided that we do have a clear path from the government and the legislation into that direction. And oddly enough, I have sadly to note that within the European community, where we aim to be a one single market, car taxation does differ a lot from country to country. We do have a lot of effort being brought onto reducing the CO2. Nevertheless, only few countries have taxation on cars based on CO2. Most of them are still with engine displacement or with power. So in a way, since we learned in the previous days that 2/3 of the innovation is provided by private funds, if a private company would be able to better profit from the money they put into innovation, it would be certainly an acceleration for innovation. Thanks a lot for your listening.
Okay. The next speaker is Ulrich Merz, who is the president and founder of BSol, which is a solar PV manufacturer. You will have, I hope, seen the excellent, very beautiful panels out at the front of the hotel. So, over to you.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure being able to address you here from this seat today. It's a little bit of a privilege of a general sponsor, but I hope in between the lines we all try to get a message. It's the industry that I try to see from a distance because I'm a part of it every day, and sometimes I might be mistaken. So I will try to address a question and maybe you will help me with an answer at the end. We try to see it from a distance, so we try to see solar from a distance, and somehow I could not understand how it's possible to produce electricity from water at a lower cost than from solar. That's just one of the major questions that I have been addressing to myself repeatedly. Now, we are all a little bit aware of solar, but at the end we think, yeah, okay, it's small, it's somewhere, it's nice, it's cozy, but it's not important and it's too expensive. That's, I assume, our general impression about the solar industry today. And then all of a sudden there is BSol being sponsor of an important event. There must be something wrong, isn't it? Okay, we have been repeatedly asking ourselves these kind of questions, and on that basis, back in 2007, we gathered the biggest players within the European Photovoltaic Industry Association, trying to put all these kind of questions on table. Quite often, I'm presenting the company and the industry on different roundtables, and you would be amazed how often we see that people try to provoke us with questions that we are not ready to answer. And that's very difficult, because if we would be confronted with that kind of question, probably we wouldn't be doing our homework well. So we started to question ourselves within the industry, what should be our future outlook? We tried to determine our current status. We tried to determine market that could be assessed, the market that we are addressing, the capacity of the market and our tasks to do, and at the end, the goal that we want to reach. So we started first from the data available from Eurostat, and we have determined different price levels for different electricity consumers around Europe. And then we tried, based on the solar irradiation, determined the cost, production cost of electricity from sun. And you would be amazed that in some countries that cost or price difference is not really huge. Then we took under assumption that in the future the conventional energy sources will just increase in costs because of less availability. So if it's conventional, it means that it's limited. Then on the other hand, renewables at least should be on the same cost level throughout the time, except for the fact that at least in solar, in doubling production capacity in the world, the costs are dropping by 22%. That's the historical data within the last 30 years. And based on that, we come to the conclusion that sooner or later the break-even point is coming. We call that point grid parity point, and this is the point where electricity produced from sun becomes cheaper than the electricity that you have to pay for from the grid, from the network system, grid. In different countries, we reach that point at different times. So based on that, we can estimate the market size. And when we just calculate the figures for 2020, we see, the study was confirmed by A.T. Kearney, I always have to stress that out, that we can be grid parity competitive on more than 90% of the European market. That's just from solar. Of course, don't get me wrong, we don't want to be only solar. I think that should not be the right solution, as my colleague from IEA said. We are deeply aware that we have to simultaneously develop all the energy sources. However, our goal is to reach 12%. And that's something that grid can well accept, without any changes. That's without storage units and without any kind of grid transformation. So, that's one important key message. The other is that in order to reach those goals, there is no technology breakthrough necessary. Today, we are mostly mistaken when we believe that photovoltaics still need to have huge technology breakthrough in order to be competitive. We can produce, or we can design or construct a PV power plant that can have higher efficiency than any coal-firing power plant. But the cost of electricity is important. So in that respect, innovation is always part of our business, but not just in terms of technology advantages or advances, but in terms of business models, market recognition, and being available for customers that need us. An important question that I have is how to tackle the obstacles that we are for sure confronted with within the next 2, 3, or 5 years' time. Since we will be the first one cutting the margins of the traditional energy companies appreciably, because we know that sun is shining normally with the highest outcome in the daytime period between 10 and 3 o'clock, when also the profit margins are the highest of traditional electricity companies, we will soon be confronted, and that's reality. We are not today. Today everybody is friendly to photovoltaic. But in the future, we will have obstacles in front of us. Some will say the grid is not able to accept it. Tell me how something that takes on 10 to 15 or 20 even % of the grid can demolish, destroy the grid. It's just a question what we have been doing for the last 100 years. So I think the technology is available, we can use it today, and it's really funny how people believe about changes in the life. We always recognize them only after they have happened. And that's something the industry should try to avoid and try to look into the future. I bet all my cards to solar, and I hope I'm not wrong. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Our final speaker is thank you. Our final speaker is Plinio Nastari, who is the president and founder of Datagro from Brazil, and he's going to talk about biofuels. But if you could also just briefly say what Datagro does apart from that.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Tyndall, colleagues, speakers, dear friends. Datagro is the largest consulting company in sugar and ethanol in Brazil, and we have clients in 41 countries, and we have been involved with this since 1976. So I'm very glad to speak about biofuels. It's interesting that we are talking about biofuels as new energy. Archaeology has found fermentation ethanol to be something that mankind was doing already 15,000 years ago. But I would like to convey you the idea that it's really one of the newest forms of energy if we think it right. Actually, biofuels have had some bad press, and not desired and not due to receive, essentially because of the mistake and the confusion between grain ethanol and other sources of feedstocks to produce ethanol. And in reality, what we see is that in spite of all this confusion, production of ethanol is expanding very quickly, and other forms of biomass use related to bioethanol production are expanding very quickly, complementing production of bioethanol. In this decade alone, production of bioethanol moved from 28 to over 100 million cubic meters, which is almost 14% growth per year. Today, ethanol is more important than sugars, total sugar production, which is what it comes from. And it's something that is happening, unfortunately, on a very concentrated way. 77% of ethanol production is still concentrated in the US and Brazil. And in Brazil, ethanol has substituted almost 50% of gasoline, actually 48.4% last year in gasoline equivalent. In the US, 7.9%. In France, 6%. In Germany, 3.9%. In the world, 7.4%. So it's not irrelevant anymore to the gasoline pool in the world. But still, people do not realize its potential and the transformations that it is presenting. Much of these advances are happening, we see, in the most dramatic way in cane-based ethanol. Productivity of cane ethanol has grown threefold in the past 35 years, and still can move or can duplicate, and that is the expectation to duplicate in the next 10 to 12 years. From 6,500 liters per hectare to 13,900 liters per hectare. That is much more than the 3,200 liters per hectare for grain, for corn, or 1,800 liters for wheat, considering the high yields of corn and wheat found in the US and Europe, respectively. Why the bad press? Well, essentially because applications in developing countries using grain would be terrible, because as we have productivities of corn in the US of 9 tons per hectare, we find productivities in developing countries of 1.5 to 2 tons per hectare. Of wheat in developing countries from 3 tons per hectare to developing countries 2.5 to 2 tons per hectare. And it's exactly in emerging markets where energy demands are most dramatic. And what we have observed in Brazil is that from cane, it's not only ethanol anymore. We are talking about power now, increasingly, from the use of bagasse and leaves. Today, the industry in Brazil is showing that the revenues and the percentage of revenues which are coming from cane processing are first ethanol, second it's going to become power, and third is going to become sugar. And we are talking about power which is renewable, which is very clean, and can be used for transportation. We are talking about ethanol, which is not only for transportation applications. We are talking about ethanol, which is more and more being used for chemical applications, plastics production. Procter & Gamble just made a deal with Braskem, South American giant in chemical business, to use green polyethylene derived from sugarcane ethanol. The achievements of cane ethanol in Brazil have been tremendous, not only in the substitution area, economically wise. If we measure the gasoline which has been substituted in the past 30 years which is 1.9 billion barrels, or 13% of Brazil's current oil reserves, 13%. It's measured in market value of gasoline. It's $240 billion, which is exactly the amount of foreign reserves Brazil has, which is given as the major reason why Brazil did not sink during the past financial crisis. And people forget. So if this is so good, if this is potentially an energy of the future, even though very old, but seen in this way, and it has been badly classified as first generation biofuel. It's not. Second generation, which is cellulosic ethanol, well, cane is second generation as well, because essentially second generation is the entire use of energy. Third generation, which is conversion of sugars directly into gasoline and diesel, well, it's also from sugars, It's also from cane, potentially, the best way. Why the bad press, and why it's still so much concentrated in Brazil, in the US? Well, essentially because of the myths around biofuels. The many myths, the many misinformation, the lack of regulatory conditions to use them, even though the auto industry in the World Fuels Charter allows for a 10% blends in all 4 categories of gasoline. So E10 is today feasible in all fleets of the world, but why it's not used? Basically because of lack of regulations and lack of information. Therefore, I think in the long term, what we have learned and what I can bring to you as a takeaway, why and how this has been possible in places like Brazil, and it can be possible other places. Well, how? First of all, the first takeaway, low government intervention in the long term. Second, R&D. Much of what has been achieved in Brazil comes from R&D, initially developed by the government, but then very quickly absorbed in the responsibility by the private industry. Third, sustainability, as Castronuevo said. In the beginning, it was 3 cubic meters per ton of cane, water usage. Now it's 0.8, and it's coming down. It's possible to have a closed-loop water system where no water is taken from the environment, and it's only the water that sugarcane brings in that it's used. And many other things, it's essentially the integral use of cane, which has been possible, and cane is essentially this very efficient biomass which is able to capture solar energy. We're talking about solar energy in a very convenient, efficient way to store, transport, and distribute on a friendly way. So I would invite you to consider biofuels as a potential new source of energy, and hopefully when people elsewhere, beyond Brazil, beyond the US, start understanding its potential, we may have a more diversified origin base, contributing for energy security, contributing for less use of fossil energy, contributing for climate change and mitigation, and for job creation, and for trade opportunities. We're talking about income generation. I wish you had seen, like I did, what was the interior of São Paulo, the interior of Minas Gerais, the interior of Goiás 30 years ago, and how much income has been generated from local energy production, and how a big transformation has happened. So that's my message. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I particularly liked your point that biofuels in some form have been used for 13,000 years, and therefore 15,000 years, yeah. Sorry, and that we shouldn't therefore think of using renewables as some sort of new concept. And if we were in the Netherlands, the idea of using the wind to provide useful energy would not seem particularly new, although not perhaps 15,000 years old, but definitely not newfangled. Okay, we now have an hour to take questions and comments and discussion. So please go ahead and introduce yourself, and either contributions or questions are very welcome.
And third, sorry, you hear me? Hello? Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have two little questions to the gentleman from the IEA and the last speaker, the gentleman from Brazil, please. The first question, if I hear the distinguished speaker from the IEA, is that he wasn't very optimistic about cooperation with the oil producers, a point he mentioned, although his job is taking care of the dialogue. I wonder, I was following the cooperation between the producer and consumer, which is started almost 15 or 20 years, and now it is structured in the establishment of an institution headquarters in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, by the name International Energy Agency, International Energy Forum. And this year, in March of this year, there was the Ministerial Conference of the IEF in Cancun, and the member states of the IEA were there. Actually, the executive directors of the IEA was there, and he gave a very positive attitude towards cooperation. And also, the first time that we hear that he is, or the agency is considering or under the impression that you can never solve or talk about energy security without talking about energy for the poor. And of course in climate change. So I hope that I misunderstood the question. I think things are going in the right direction, and the oil producers are really delighted to cooperate with the consumers and the whole world at large to find solution to the energy situation. Suffice it to mention that the new organization on renewables, which I think is ARENA, is headquartered in Abu Dhabi, the capital city of the United Arab Emirates, which is a major oil exporting country. Now, this is for the gentleman. To my friend from Brazil...
hang on, sorry. I'll just ask Ulrich to respond to that, and then I'll come back to you and we'll move on to Brazil.
Yeah, I'm grateful for that, because it gives me an opportunity to correct something if I had been misunderstood. The dialogue that we think is important encompasses, of course, not only consuming countries, producing countries have to be an integral part of it. And we have engaged in Cancun, OPEC, IEA, and the Secretariat of the International Energy Forum in a joint cooperation project, which I myself have negotiated from the IEA's point of view. So I don't know what you are referring to in detail, but my point here is, and I would like to use this opportunity to make clear, that of course in the future the cooperation and the old lines that we had, let's say, between producers and consumers maybe feeling a little bit attacked by the threat of a cartel, these lines are increasingly blurred. We have seen 2 years ago with the high oil prices, with the volatility, that this hurts producers and consumers a lot, that all have an interest in stable market conditions, that a reasonable price has to be found when it comes to oil, so that a barrel price of $150 is not sustainable neither for consumers nor for producers. And these developments have led to a reinforcement of the role of the International Energy Forum, which is in fact a dialogue between consuming and producing countries. And we as IEA and our member states are very happy to participate in that dialogue, and we will contribute, we have contributed, and we will contribute substantively to that success of the dialogue. And the same is true, I think, for the IEF as an organization, which, as ministers have concluded in Cancun, will get a new charter, I think, by the end of next February. So in that sense, to my colleague from OPEC, nothing has changed. We are very open and looking forward to the cooperation. And let's say that does not mean that when it comes to the analysis of the supply side and to energy security, that our publications here and there point to the fact that in the next 20, 30, 40 years, we will see an increasing concentration of oil supply in the Middle East, and then we normally add that is not the most stable region politically. And I think that is a valid, reasonable evaluation, and that entails simply some risks. That does not say that for always US or Europe or in Japan you have always political stability, but seen from today there is a certain risk, and I can assure you that here and there raises concerns. But it is not only the Middle East. We have discussed this morning the Eurasian area, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan. There are also, it's also a region where I would say this is not the most stable political region. And that, of course, when it comes to such a sensitive fuel as oil, that raises simply some concerns.
Okay, thank you. Just in terms of, I will come back to you in a sec, but in terms of international governance, which is your last point, the G20 includes both the major energy consumers and most of the major energy producers. The exception is Iran, which is in energy terms particularly problematic. But do you think that the G20 has a role to play?
Well, I do think so that in the future also the G20 has to play a role when it comes to key global energy challenges. There is in my view, no doubt about it. The G8 has had energy and climate change on the agenda for a couple of years because it is a global challenge, and the G20 is the key informal global governance institution. I stress informal, yeah, but we have no comparable informal institution. So I would very much welcome if the G20 would concentrate more on these vital questions after having resolved the financial crisis.
Okay. Well, that won't take them long, will it?
Can I continue? Just a footnote is that in the first 2 days of October, in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, they're going to host a workshop where the IEA is invited to discuss energy security and the subsidies, which came in Pittsburgh G20 communique. And I think the transition to other sources of energy is moving forward, whether the Middle East is stable or not. I hope this is the case. Now, can I have the other question to the gentleman from Brazil? I think everybody commend the experience of Brazil on biofuel for the reason that it is really it is done on what they call marginal lands or rain-fed lands. This morning we listened to a presentation where biofuel is consuming water to produce 1 BTU or whatever by 73 times more than the fossil fuel oil. That presentation this morning. But when we talk about the biofuel and the competition of biofuel first generation on the food supply, and you take the numbers of the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, it's really telling a different story. If you take, for example, the corn, which is produced in the United States, and you mentioned it's going to be, biofuel is going to be one of the main solutions of the energy security or whatever. I can remind you or can refer you to a study or a report which appears in Foreign Affairs in June 2007 by 2 professors of University of Minnesota, and they are also members of the food industry in that university, where they argued against the first generation biofuel. And they mentioned that if you use the entire production of corn in the United States to produce ethanol and eventually gasoline, this will be sufficient for 12% of the gasoline consumption in the United States. And if you take the total consumption of the United States, as just for simplification, as 20 million barrel per day, 50% gasoline, that it will be sufficient for only 1.2 million barrel per day. Now compare that with depriving people, the hungry people or the needy people of that product. I wonder if you also remember, you mentioned the old times when the biofuel was considered. Okay. Okay.
And I will ask Plinio and then Doug to respond to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question, Mr. Suleiman, because it gives me an opportunity to extend further something that I tackled. First of all, we don't like this classification of first, second generation because we think it's misleading, essentially because cane ethanol has been classified as first generation as well, and we don't believe it belongs to the same group as corn or wheat. Certainly, we don't advocate corn or wheat ethanol. In some cases, grain ethanol production, I would say, is even immoral. But cane ethanol is a different story. Let me remind you that today, the example that Brazil provides, which is very significant, allows for the understanding that half of the gasoline used in Brazil is being substituted with an acreage in cane, which is only 4.5 million hectares. Well, in the conditions of Brazil, that is very small. You know, Brazil has an arable land of 320 million hectares, of which 65 are being cropped in all crops. So 4.5 million hectares for Brazil means very little. Well, it so happens that cane in the world, how much cane, what is the acreage of cane in the world? Well, it's 22 million hectares total, out of 1.6 billion hectares cropped in the world. 22 million. And that cane is responsible for 80% of total sugar production. If we were to blend 10% ethanol in the entire gasoline pool in the world, it would require today, with average productivity levels, 19 million hectares. With productivity levels projected for 10 years forward, we are talking about 8.5 million hectares only. That is the difference, you know. With cane, it is feasible. And with cane that can also be used to produce power, that can also be used to produce biogas, to fuel heaters, you know, and to be power to be used in electric cars because it's renewable, you know, and energy, a source of renewable energy, which is probably the closest thing of a zero-emission vehicle, a ZEV. I remember 20 years ago we were discussing in California ZEVs, you know, from electricity, but the U.S. was burning coal in Arizona to send the electricity to be used in Los Angeles. It didn't make any sense, you know. Well, ethanol from cane, energy, power from cane, used in an intelligent, adequate way, is the closest thing to the sustainable energy we are looking for. That's why I said, you know, this old new energy is probably the best thing we have attainable. There's no technological barrier. You know, anyone in Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia is capable of converting part of their cane into energy. If the less developed countries that produce sugar today only converted their molasses, which today is being sold underpriced sugar, sugars in molasses receive a price which is 30 to 50% of the price of sugar. If they converted those molasses into ethanol, they would produce enough ethanol to substitute 22% of their gasoline needs only from molasses. With a marginal increase in cane, they could be substituting a good amount. I don't mean that cane can be a complete substitute to oil. It will never be. But it can be a very good complement.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, let me just add a couple of different points. And the analysis that was quoted relative to the potential impact of a significant corn-based ethanol market in the U.S., I would call it probably answered the wrong question, because no one's certainly in the policy world, nor in the technology world, thinks that that's actually a solution that would be implemented. This is why there's a very aggressive R&D effort in the U.S. for cellulosic and other pathways, other fuel pathways, that would include gasification and Fischer-Tropsch, that would include algae, biofuels as well. It also is expressed explicitly in the federal policy, which includes very explicit amounts of required greenhouse gas reductions to qualify for the renewable fuel standard going forward. So while it's an example and it makes, I would call it a point, it doesn't really answer a question that reflects wisdom relative to advising policy or advising industrial development. Secondly, I think it would overstate very strongly the history of the impact of alternative fuels on world food prices and on agriculture, which were actually shown in the 2007-2009 timeframe to not be that significant, even though they were blamed for it. In fact, there was significant analysis showed that it was a combination of many factors, many of them being related to the increase in commodity prices that were driven from oil. And so that's a very, it's a complicated economics cycle there, but I think the lesson taken away from that, from the European experience around biodiesel as well, is that if the goal is towards sustainability, then one must be mindful in terms of defining what one means for sustainability, including land use, water, and the production cycle, including transportation from point of resource to point of use. And so I think we've all learned some lessons, and I think it still holds great promise.
Okay.
I am Momir Đurović, coming from Montenegro, from Academy of Science. Last year I was involved in the XQ team to produce a strategic plan for sustainable energy for Asia and Pacific. We were 10 of us. I was the only one picked out outside Asia and Pacific region. And I realized that what's going around the world is going in Asia and Pacific region, as far as the new switch to new energy sources. And I learned that they do a lot of effort in trying to utilize hot rocks technology. Personally, I had a contact with some Russian scientists on that topic sometime earlier. I know the problems of drilling and everything, but in my view, definitely, if the problem, technological problem, is going to be solved with hot rocks technology, then that's going to be probably the best switch to new energy sources. Definitely better than nuclear, and definitely better than any other renewable source. So can I have a comment probably from you, since you're coming from the National Laboratory, I understood, which I visited a few times. Thank you.
I'd defer to anyone else who wants to, but yeah, I'll explain it on the microphone. So if I heard correctly, please correct me if I'm wrong, you were saying hot rock technology. The other name, okay, this is not traditional geothermal. It's what would be called enhanced geothermal systems. It is very much a technology which relies upon deep well drilling. I'll call it creating fluidity within the hot rocks, which is why it gets the name hot rock, and to be able to extract that out into a traditional above ground thermal cycle to create power. And a couple points, just to not belabor and go into the detail too much. The assessment of the core of the heat of the core of the Earth, which is actually penetrable, i.e. Adaptive, toward hot rock is actually enormous. There's been a number of studies in the US and elsewhere. The challenge, however, is that the technology has not been able to be proven even at I would call it a research scale yet. There have been a few efforts here in Europe, Australia, and in the US. Each of them have, as one would imagine, trying to drill down and create porous media at 5,000 or 6,000 meters underground. A significant amount of technology challenges to realize this potential. And so while there, yes, but I could make an equivalent argument for ocean and marine and other renewable technologies, which also have significant potential, but still will require some development, which basically comes to the point of kind of full circle that there's a significant amount of innovation to be had in this transition to new energy. And we need to be mindful of a very broad portfolio of actions that not only take the here and the now, those technologies which are commercial today, like solar, electric vehicles, and hybrid vehicles, and all sorts of other biofuels, but also to continue to support very strongly an R&D portfolio.
Okay, my follow-up question. On geothermal, why is it necessary to innovate and get hot rocks rather than using the geothermal that we know works and that works very well in Italy, for example, or Iceland?
So to that point, so he's trying to contrast here, I'll call it first generation or traditional generation geothermal, which, as many of you know, if you've ever visited a beautiful natural spa, for example, the hot water is very accessible, or accessible with a relatively shallow well. In those situations, nature has done us a great favor, and they've made the heat accessible to us. In the other situation, what we're trying to do is basically engineer a well, and those are two very different enterprises. The opportunity with engineering is that one would hope that you can do it wherever you would like to, and the challenge, of course, with traditional is that nature has only done it where there are beautiful spas and geothermal plants. So.
Patricia Ellis, Women's Foreign Policy Group. I was just wondering, with the increasing demand for energy on a daily basis, whether it's from India, China, Brazil, and other parts of the world, what is the time frame for implementing some of these new technologies that we are talking about? And if someone could talk about what is an ideal mix of all these different renewable sources of energy? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very good question. The ideal mix would take us more than the remaining 39 minutes that we have, but Ulrich, well, perhaps you could start.
Well, I mean, the ideal mix, that is, of course, always dependent on national circumstances. It is a political choice to a certain extent. In my home country, in Germany, they have decided to phase out nuclear. That's a political problem because it's not socially accepted. So they have to rely a lot on renewables, and it's not going to be very easy, but there is no other option, regardless of what political party you are affiliated with. And it depends, of course, on your possibilities, whether you have oil, your resource endowment, so to speak, whether you have oil or gas in your country, then you will see it differently. Look at China or India. Coal is there abundantly. So when it comes to electricity production, coal will always be a key element. And that is how most governments take it. They take it from there where they are today and try to develop now low-carbon technologies. So when it comes to India or China, we as an international energy agency attach a lot of importance, for example, of supporting work of carbon capture and storage in these countries. And we are very well aware that in particular in China, they fully understand that, and they are increasing also their research and their energy, their engagement in this area. A timeline. What we have been doing over the last years is to develop so-called global technology roadmaps for key areas. So we have a wind global energy roadmap. We have now one for cement, for PV, and we will be doing that for for around about 20 technologies over the next couple of years. And these global technology roadmaps, they have also a timeline. What do we have to reach by what decade in order to live up to the blue map scenario to halve the emissions by 2050? But now we are also engaging in developing national roadmaps in these areas. Because what we of course need is, when you have a global roadmap in wind energy, you need key energy consuming countries or big players that have a roadmap on wind energy and that have a policy that contributes to this global roadmap. And we are very happy, for example, to cooperate in this area with China. We have a concrete proposal and a project going on to develop a wind roadmap, technology roadmap with them, and it's for their 12th year plan, and the national targets they have set, very ambitious ones in terms of wind energy. We will help them to develop a concept how to implement that China-wide. And this kind of activity, I think, is crucial. I think what we have to take into account is that if we really want to have this energy revolution, it needs governments, it needs government involvement, it needs government interventions. Government intervention is not always good, but here in the design of energy policy, I think there is no way out of it. You need that. And this crucial break of the link between CO2 consumption and economic growth, we get that only if we decarbonize the energy sector. And we are pretty much convinced that new regulatory frameworks, for example, you can only develop in close cooperation and with governments. It's governments who have to kind of enact these laws for CCS, for example. And not, in order not to reinvent the wheel, at IEA, for example, we have research work going on with our member countries to develop models of how to do that and to learn from the experience that we have reached. But for example, when it comes to CCS, we have to do it now. The technology may be available in 10, 15 years for mass deployment, but we have to develop the regulatory framework parallel to it. Otherwise, we end up in a situation that the industry tells us, we are ready for deployment, where is the framework for regulation? And that, I think, is true for many other areas, but in this area, as a CCS coal, it's pretty apparent.
Yes, well, we need regulation, but we also need subsidy, as the
Yes.
industry will certainly
No, that
tell
is
us.
included, that regulation
Yeah.
may also need subsidies, feed-in
Yeah.
tariffs for wind, for solar.
And for CCS. Ulrich, you said in your ideal scenario, solar would provide 12 to 15% of the electricity grid. So I think that was right. So where would the other 85% of electricity come from?
Well, I totally agree. It's a mix, and it's something that's highly unpredictable for the moment. It's like a pillar, existing pillar that we have right now, energy pillar, let's call it like that, that is slowly collapsing for many reasons, for being overaged, for being under pressure due to the high demand, and now we have to do something, and we have to take decisions. Either we start building new pillars, completely independent, which is in that respect some brand new technology that we have to sit behind the table and quickly start thinking on it and try to develop it in no time. Or we try to strengthen the existing pillar. And by strengthening the existing pillar, I mean adding up the technologies that we can use today. And one of them, indeed, is solar. The other is wind. We have the third one, the fourth one, and so on. And then, probably due to the fact of market players, due to the fact of market conditions, we will be able to come up to the mix that's quite unique for every market addressed. What we have to keep in mind is certain limitations that probably some technologies have, and try to think along with them. But if you ask me about the mix or the perfect mix, I certainly don't know.
Okay, thank you. Doug?
Yeah, just a very, very quick comment relative to the question on timing, and I tried to make this this point, and maybe I glanced too quickly over it in my opening remarks, which is we must act with a sense of urgency now, with a very broad array of action and policy portfolios, everything from R&D through regulation and legislation, et cetera, for current markets. The other point that I also made is that the energy infrastructure is very long-lived, and if we don't actually address the retirement or the conversion of our existing infrastructure fleet, in particular some of the electric power facilities, those will have an extended lifetime beyond really our ability to deal with the climate goals that have been laid out. And to give a sense of what the renewable, the alternative energy technologies are, we had a quote earlier about the amount of biofuels coming even just from cane sugar. But one should get a sense that this is real business. The investments in alternative energies in the last few years are more than $150 billion globally. Wind last year was 36% of all new power generation globally. Solar, the global solar production, capacity production, is estimated to become close to 70 gigawatts per year just in a few years. That's almost 70% or 80% again of the total power production that was added last year. So these are very real businesses. They're growing at significant double digits and have been growing at significant double digits for now many decades. It is, in fact, a transition in process now. Even if you don't have solar on your own house or you don't see it very often, be assured that it's happening. It's part of not only national policies, as I mentioned, for energy, but also very, very clearly on the radar screen for innovation and for industrial growth. And particularly when one listens to and observes the actions coming from China, South Korea, India, et cetera. And it's a very rich opportunity for all of us.
Okay, thank you.
Franco Nemac, Energy Restructuring Agency, Slovenia. The representative of International Energy Agency mentioned that $150 per barrel is not a sustainable price. I think that, of course, from some point of view could seem so, but on the other side, I think that it's more appropriate than low energy prices, which are not sustainable for development of energy efficiency and renewables. We are not trying to develop renewable energies because we just want to develop them, but because we think that with traditional energy sources we have problems. We have problems of quantities available, and we have, of course, ecological problems. So far we are some way forced to develop renewables and energy efficiency, and of course we should in some way increase the prices of energy rather than take them at lower level.
Okay, thank you. Ulrich, I'll ask you first, and then Andrea, perhaps you could comment on whether $150 a barrel is desirable.
I said for a couple of years now that the age of cheap energy is over. And I think that's something we can rely on. When I said that $150 per barrel is not sustainable, I wanted to refer basically to developing countries where you have millions of people who are driven in poverty, back into poverty because of these developments. Of course, in industrialized countries, it has also an effect, $150 is substantial, and of course, consumers feel that in their budget. But overall, they can manage, nobody is really driven into abject poverty because of this, maybe in Europe. But overall, when you see the global development, it was a catastrophe for Africa and many developing countries. And that is, I think, why we all should have an interest in reasonable prices, whatever that means. And I would say where we are right now, between 70 and 80, that is somehow reasonable. Yeah? It is not cheap. In comparison to what we have seen in the 90s, it's a lot more expensive. But I think that can kind of, we can live with it. But of course, it is never kind of clear how the price will develop. And I would not exclude that we will have a development that we have seen a couple of years ago again. It might develop in this direction. But then the same problems will occur again, especially with regard to the developing world, and that should really be a concern to all of us. But because in that kind of situation, nobody has an easy answer. We cannot transfer billions of dollars then to subsidize oil consumption in Africa. And that makes us a little bit helpless and speechless when we are in that kind of a situation.
Okay, thank you. Andrea?
Well, just a small comment, because basically when you fill your car up, your truck up at the pump station, over 50% of the price, in some cases 80 to 90% of the price is due to go to the tax. So the oil price, yes, it does have an impact. In some countries, we did see consumers changing their habits, like in the United States. I think you have personally experienced that. People leaving their truck or SUVs aside and buying even a used car, a small used car, fuel efficient. We did not experience that in Western Europe, where people were just simply paying the extra price, but they didn't want to give away the freedom of individual mobility.
My name is Jamnik, National Institute of Chemistry, Ljubljana, Slovenia. I have a comment on this energy mix that there was a discussion running on about. Well, I think that if you want to replace entire energy production from the fossil fuels globe-wide, there is not much choice left. It's just solar and nuclear. And this is a common opinion among scientists. And sooner or later we will need to do this. Perhaps in 100 years only, but finally we'll be forced to do this. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I will certainly let the panel respond, but I would say it's solar and wind and marine renewables, and particularly solar thermal, which I'd like to ask some of the panel about. I mean, because as I said, it's not just electricity, although you can use electricity for heating, but it may be more sensible to use solar thermal for heating, and indeed biomass for heating, district heating and so on. So there are other forms of renewables, and then there is nuclear, as you say, and then there is carbon capture and storage. So the mix is a bit broader than just solar or nuclear. But I'll come back to you after the panelists have had their chance. Anyone else? Okay, well, we'll go back to you at the back.
Of course, there is a number of other alternatives, but if you want to replace entirely the whole energy consumption by renewables, any calculations you do or any estimation that you do, it comes out that you can only rely on these two as a major sources. Yeah.
Well, nuclear is not renewable, but there we go.
So
Is wind renewable?
The wind is not going to run out.
No, there is a lot of talk now that it's not renewable. So the big question is what's renewable.
Can you just explain why wind is not renewable?
I can explain you later on in details. But
well, I think it's quite
it's
relevant.
not as simple as that you take energy from the wind and wind mines on the same energy. On top, you have to be very careful on the woods and the surrounding what to do to get a proper value out of the wind. There's a lot of discussion, Professor, on that point.
So let me add a couple of thoughts, both on the technical potential conversation, which comes from the science community, as well as the environmental impacts of all energy, which include wind and solar and others. So the technical potential comment, which is, I'll call it, this is a term that the scientists like to come forward with an argument like this based upon, I'll call it the physics of the energy system. And while we've done many of those potentials, many others have done them as well and published them. I think the key point is that the energy system, let me come back to it, is extremely large. It is very core to our, basically our way of life through our economy. And therefore it is not a technical argument per se. It is an economic argument that includes the balance of many policy and lifestyle goals, and includes, as the other gentleman said, a wide variety of mindful environmental decisions, which include water, land use, the impacts, visual impacts, perhaps impacts on tourism, agriculture, etc. You know, the argument, the technical argument that yes, a wind turbine actually extracts energy out of the wind, absolutely correct. There's another argument that also says if you put dark solar panels in a landmass that used to be light, it becomes warmer. So what are the overall impacts of this relative to climate change and temperature on the Earth? I think the takeaway is that it's not simple, it's complicated and must be well understood, but more importantly, what we're faced with is the fact that we now must mindfully transition from an energy system which we have all known, and our maybe not our grandparents, but our parents have known, that have been very concentrated in terms of a few sources. Coal, oil, gas, maybe a little nuclear, and of course bio in the developing countries. Married with a very concentrated set of conversion technologies, electricity through thermal boilers and the internal combustion engine. The world going forward is going to diversify, is diversifying now. And I think we should embrace that because it will include much more balance of energy security, environmental preservation, and economic development, but also as a consumer and as markets, much what's called broader and deeper markets. You will have more choice. You will have more choice, there will be more competition and more innovation for entrepreneurs and for companies to bring forward better solutions. So I see it, yes, technically there's an argument on one side around the sources, but in terms of optimism for this transition to new energy, it opens up many doors that we haven't thought about before. So I encourage you to kind of embrace the opportunities.
Okay, thank you.
Just to add a couple of thoughts what Doug has just been saying, our models run up to 2050. And we have 28 member countries, and they want advice, you know, on a long-term basis what to do. And our models all, of course, include coal, of course, clean coal in the longer run, nuclear, of course, oil, gas. We haven't talked about gas. And our message is fossil fuels will stay for decades to come to be a source of energy. And that is not just because we are not, you know, intellectually able to run different models. Of course, we could do that. But then our governments would tell us, you are completely nuts. I cannot implement that. It's too expensive. You know, nobody would accept the decisions, the hard decisions that we would have to take, the change in lifestyle, what have you. So, you know, when I'm saying all these models are, of course, more complex today, and they are open new possibilities, as Doug has just rightly pointed out. It also means we have to invest in R&D as much as we can in order to really explore new opportunities. What we see today is what we see in 2010, and certainly in 2040, you know, some of the people then may look back and say, well, why didn't they see this and that at that time, you know? But that's how life is. Things will develop, and nobody will exclude that in 30 years to come, we will have new opportunities for even cleaner energy. you know. But that is not clear and not certain, and that is why we have to base our scenarios today on what is possible. And once in a while, we as an agency are already excused to be over-optimistic, you know, because the models we run in the range of 2 degrees warming of the globe, they are already, when it comes to the, you know, the political validity of whether we can really do that, at the margin. So they are very optimistic, and it needs to be done a lot, and it's only to underscore that time is short. We need to act now and not in 2020.
Okay, thank you. Fine example of global biodiversity preservation at the front there, so thank you. Any other questions or comments? If not, can I ask a bit more focus on electric vehicles, and particularly how quickly they can become widely available at a reasonable price and with a reasonable range and a reasonably quick recharging rate?
Well, the question is extremely interesting, and I think we're not in a stage in which we can give very precise answers on that. It depends on the speed of development of battery technologies. It depends on the speed of switch over that will be demanded from the overall regulation framework from internal combustion engine to electric engines. Nevertheless, technology is basically ready. Some fine-tuning needs to be done. As to what concerns usage of the car we have outside here today has a range of 220 kilometers, which is more than enough for 90 to 95% of daily use. So even today, could be not the only car in the household, but probably one of the cars in the household. Charging time. Initially, they were from 8 to 12 hours. Now we can fast charge in 2 hours. Still, for us, not fast enough. We are aiming at recharging in much shorter time, 5 to 10 minutes maximum. Just one further example, which is still a prototype for us, our prototype called Vision. We managed to put together 2 electrical engine and 1 very small 3-cylinder turbo diesel. And this car has a performance of an M3, self-limited speed of 250 kilometers per hour, accelerating from 0 to 100 in less than 5 seconds. So it is even possible to have a very efficient car today with very low consumption. One last remark is concerning pollution. A lot has been done by the car manufacturer to diminish pollution, and if you take a car in the 1970s and you take a car today, it would take around about 110 cars today to pollute as much as one single car in the 1970s. That as much progress we've been able to achieve in 30 to 40 years' time.
Thank you. That is certainly true, and I think California was one of the leaders in that respect. But you were clear on range and recharging time. What about costs of purchasing an electric vehicle in comparison to one of your diesel vehicles?
Well, today the fleet we have was not possible to be purchased by clients. We only leased that, and it was a subsidized lease in order to be on a competitive market level. So the amount of the subsidy needed both from the suppliers, the manufacturers, and or the government still has to be defined once the technology is a little bit more stable. I would say that in any case we will be able as a group to supply a fully electric vehicle that we call the mega city vehicle within the first half of this decade. That means then in 2 to 3 years' time we will be able to be very precise about the pricing. Definitely should be a very competitive pricing versus internal combustion engines.
My name is Peter Novak. I'm coming from the Institute for High Technology in Novo Mesto. And I have one question. If we are going to the electrical cars, is somebody calculating if the enough is resource for the Cooper to make the motors? Because we know the situation in the 70s by the Club of Rome, which is saying how the problematic will be the resource of Cooper. The comment I have. Many of you are talking about the energy consumption. I am very disappointed because energy cannot be consumed. Energy can be used. We are consuming the fuels. And nobody of you is talking about the exergy. In reality, we are buying and we are needing only exergy. We don't need the energy. We need the fuels. And fuels are a carrier of the exergy. And normally, if we are going from the energy to the exergy, then we know, as you say, more we can use low-quality energy for the heating and high-quality energy for the cars, etc. And maybe if the AI will change these things in generally, maybe we change also the thinking of the people, how to use the energy.
Thank you. That's a very interesting comment. And a question about copper. Can anyone answer that? Is there enough copper in the world to deal with electric vehicles?
Probably yes, from Chile, but I don't know. I'm not an expert.
Well, I lived in Zambia at one stage. There's quite a lot of copper there as well, but I'm afraid the answer is we don't know the answer. We'll have to go away and do some homework. So thank you. In the front here.
My question also goes to the electric cars. Is there any sense to introduce electric cars if we are supply them with the fossil fuels?
Thanks for the question. That was the sense of my comment before. We have made a quite precise calculation. In some countries, it definitely would make no sense. In some countries, if you run a fully electric vehicle, yes, it's zero emission when you run the vehicle, but it would consume the equivalent of 140 to 160 grams of CO2 per kilometer. And if you consider that today you can easily buy for a normal price a 320 diesel efficient dynamics which has 109 grams of CO2, then again we better run on conventional fuel our cars and forget it. So whenever thinking about energy via electric power into our cars, yes, it is zero emission in the car, but what about the production process of the energy? That is to be taken carefully into consideration, yes.
Additionally, let's say also my thinking goes in a way that, of course, we are trying to put in the market the electric cars, not because they are better or ecologically, but because in the long term we think that the abundance of the oil and the price of the oil will increase, and this is one of the reasons why we are trying to introduce electric cars. And of course these cars should be at the end supplied by renewable fuels, not by fossil or nuclear. That from my point of view has no global sense.
Yeah, nevertheless, let us not forget that unfortunately today personal transportation is one of the major causes of pollution of mega cities. And knowing that a growing proportion of the population will live in such big cities, it is a matter as well, not only of global warming, but of national health.
Anyone who lives in London, as I do, will be very aware that diesel engines have a downside as well as an upside, particularly the taxis. Okay, the back, please.
A comment I would like to make regarding this last issue, whether it's better to have a centralized production of the electrical energy from, let's say, fossil fuels, or to do this decentralized in each car engine. I think there are two differences, actually. The first one is the efficiency. Of course, the battery also doesn't have 100% efficiency, but I think that a bigger power plant still has significantly higher efficiency than the engine in the car. And the next issue is the following. If you want to trap the CO2 produced, it's much easier to do this in a central power plant than in all the car engines. Thank you.
Okay, I think this was more a comment, and I would like to add one. Of course, Professor Novak is totally right. I personally try to follow the scientific understanding of energy, which I think we are all aware of, but sometimes it's difficult to explain. So I prefer, instead of using the word energy consumption, I say electricity consumption, because that's different. But okay, I think for PV industry, so the industry that I'm part of, we are all very much looking forward to electric vehicles. I think a lot of us know, many of us know that that we are now in front of so-called third industrial revolution, and probably besides changed grid concept, we are also waiting for batteries. And one great battery that we could use during the day is electric car, electric vehicle. And so the energy that we can store into our cars during the daytime, we can use later on at the night. And personally, I tried to buy electric vehicle for some time, and whenever I could get it, it's sold out. So that's my main question. Do you think there is enough, so that there is market big enough for electric vehicles? Because I think it is. I tried already some, and I would be happy to buy it.
Well, I'm glad to take an order here. No, but honestly, I would be foolish to sell you today a fully electric vehicle just for going around even Slovenia. We learned that there are in Ljubljana around about 100 points of possible recharge of your car. But then again, if you have to travel along the country and still the network to recharge the car is not properly done, then you would not have a personal mobility item, but a personal disturbance item, and that we would like to avoid. So first, let's get things right, let's get technology up to speed, let's get the customer habits plugged in, the concept of the vehicle, and we're very close to that. And third, but not of least importance, let's get the, how you call it, the grid, the distribution network of energy up to speed in order to avoid full city blackouts simply because people are recharging their cars.
Okay. Maybe just, if I may, sorry, just yes, very short. I totally agree. The other point of view could be that I would like to be dependent on my electric vehicle, as I'm dependent on my laptop.
I take your point. I take your point. Besides, if you're fostering the idea of selling the car jointly with your solar panel that could recharge the car autonomously, that could be evaluated.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will put one comment and one question, since we are talking about this a lot about cars. One is that development, especially going in some, what you called it here in Europe, emerging market. It's some of you mentioned this, the new needs, let's say the different customers are coming on the market. And this needs, for instance, in India, they solve a lot of energy problem with solar energy, with new products, new the old energy or the new energy, but the new products which reduce the cost of the energy and offer the new opportunity of the use of the energy. Just remember what happened in history with electricity when Nikola Tesla came out with electric alternative current electric motors. This changed completely the use of energy. This increased the use of electric energy. And so we have the completely new market. We had billions of people who are not at all using the energy. And if we will go on the classic use of the energy, what we are talking now here, we have no at all energy for these people. So the industry have to adapt themselves as well, to find the new way, the new equipment and so on. So since you are so advanced in talking about electric car, my company, we patented asked for the patent 25 years ago about electric car recharger. Now we have 5 years old, now we have 5 months old grandson, and I hope that he can use the right of these patents when he will be my age, 67. So you are very much advanced. But I have one question. I can use in Brazil flex car. 95% of Brazilian industry, car industry, it's flex car. So I go to the pump and I put ethanol or I put gas. No problem. Your cars in Brazil are also adopted to use the same system, but I cannot use in Europe. So what you are talking about electric cars if you are not using ethanol besides Sweden?
Okay, thank you. Well, we're almost out of time, but
I think the question was not for me, but was for the auto industry. But
well, very quick answer and a question for you. The answer is, as our colleague said before, there is not a clear set of rules to use ethanols on a worldwide base in cars, except Brazil, where it is absolutely clear. Few examples here and there, but not a common European or a worldwide regulation. First comment. Second comment concerning the electric cars. We're thinking about it as the newest propulsion system, but is an old new system. Electric was the first car that in history in the early 1900s broke the 100 kilometers per hour benchmark. So again, like for sugarcane, maybe it's a new old technology coming up.
Thank you. Well, it's 29 minutes past, so I think we better stop because the Slovenian foreign minister is speaking at 5:30, so we don't want to keep them waiting. Thank you very much for all the panelists. I personally found that very interesting, and I hope you did as well. So thank you very much.